My throat burned ferociously, as if I had swallowed crushed glass mixed with hot coals. Every attempt to breathe filled my lungs with an unbearable fire, a supreme agony that paralyzed my nervous system, one cell at a time. On the cold marble floor of my luxury mansion, an architectural masterpiece I had bought with my own sweat and sleepless nights, I lay helpless, staring upward. Above me, Evelyn's elegant silhouette stood out against the crystal chandelier. My wife, the woman I had knelt before at the altar, promising her my soul. She wore a black silk dress, holding a crystal glass, now empty. Her favorite perfume, a rare essence of jasmine and musk, drifted through the heavy air. In those final moments, that scent no longer woke any desire, only a profound, visceral nausea. Next to her, her father, Charles Sterling, stood with his hands in his tailored suit pockets. He adjusted his immaculate white cuffs with terrifying detachment, as if he were watching a routine stock transaction rather than his son-in-law's violent death. His gaze, hardened by decades of shady business dealings, was fixed on me without a shred of regret. "You were just a useful idiot, Arthur," Evelyn whispered, leaning over me. Her voice, which once sounded like a warm melody, was now sharp and completely stripped of affection. "You signed the transfer papers 10 minutes ago. Your logistics company, the real estate shares, everything is now in my father's name and mine. This mansion is ours. You're just an unfortunate stroke, victim, brought on by the stress of your exhausting work. The autopsy won't find a single thing." I tried to scream, to spit the blood pooling in my mouth into her face, but my vocal cords were completely paralyzed. The poison was working with breathtaking speed. Charles nodded approvingly, smiling grimly as he checked his gold watch. "You were good with numbers, boy," the old man added in a gravelly voice, "but completely blind when it came to people. Did you really think a family like ours, with old blood and connections in the highest spheres, would ever accept an ambitious orphan from the province as our equal? You saved our business from bankruptcy in 2022, and we thank you for that. But now you're a liability. You want audits, you want transparency, things that don't fit our style." Every word was a dagger to my spasmodic heart. My entire 5-year marriage flashed before my eyes like a horror film. I died with my soul screaming in rage, a rage so vast, it felt capable of ripping the fabric of reality itself. A second of total darkness, a complete absence of sound and pain. Then, like a sudden bolt of lightning, a massive rush of air hit my chest. I gasped violently, sitting up in bed, my arms thrust out to repel invisible attackers. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal. I looked around in terror, expecting to see the high ceiling of the mansion and forensic doctors. Instead, my eyes met minimalist gray walls, a simple oak desk with 3 monitors, and a worn leather sofa. I was back in my old bachelor apartment. "It can't be," I whispered, touching my throat. My skin was intact. No burning, no paralysis. My breathing was deep and clear. On the nightstand, my phone screen lit up with a message. My hands shook as I picked it up. The date on the screen made my breath catch: Tuesday, June 15th, 2021, 8:30 a.m. I collapsed back onto the pillows, dizzy. 2021? I had died in 2026. I opened the message. It was from Evelyn. "Good morning, my love. Hope you slept well. Don't forget our reservation tonight at our favorite restaurant. Can't wait to see you. I miss you. Kisses!" A wave of polar cold spread through my veins. It wasn't a dream. My memory held specific tax codes, Swiss bank accounts, and the name of Evelyn's lover, Julian, whom she would introduce to me in 2022 as her distant cousin. I stood up and went to the bathroom mirror. My face was 5 years younger. No stress, wrinkles, no premature gray hair. But my eyes no longer belonged to a naive 30-year-old. A cold, calculated fire burned within them, born of betrayal and death. In exactly 1 week, according to the old timeline, I was going to propose to Evelyn on an exclusive beach in Greece. I had spent almost all my savings on a diamond ring to prove my worth. I let out a bitter laugh. Destiny had given me a second chance. "I am reborn," I whispered to my reflection. This time, the game will be played by my rules. I will destroy you, piece by piece, until you beg for the mercy you never showed me. The first rule of my revenge was absolute dissimulation. Breaking up with Evelyn now would be too easy, too merciful. They would just find another victim. I wanted the satisfaction of watching them fall into a financial and social abyss, taking everything from them, just as they had taken it from me. At 7:30 p.m., I was sitting by the window of the elegant restaurant. My heart raced when I saw her enter. Evelyn looked spectacular in a flowing white dress, her smile seemingly innocent. "Arthur, darling," she cried, kissing my cheek. The scent of jasmine flooded my senses. Every fiber of my body tensed, wanting to push her away, but I forced a warm, perfect smile. During dinner, she spoke of her vacation plans and her father's hard work on a new real estate project. I analyzed her words like a computer. I knew her father's project was already a financial black hole funded by loan sharks, and they desperately needed the liquidity my logistics company was starting to generate. "My father wants to invite you to a game of golf this Saturday," she said casually. "He thinks you're a very promising young man and wants to discuss business opportunities." "I'd be honored, Evelyn," I replied, looking directly into her large blue eyes. "I've always felt I have a lot to learn from Mr. Sterling." Inwardly, I smiled. Saturday would mark the official start of my trap. I wasn't running from them. I was going to become the most docile, generous, and blind partner they could ever dream of, until their greed pushed them over the edge. On Monday morning, I arrived at the headquarters of Sterling Logistics Express. In 2021, the company was thriving with a fleet of 50 trucks. But I knew a Trojan horse sat in my office, my CFO, Michael, who would later be bought by my father-in-law to forge internal reports. My first step was creating a parallel structure. Using a trusted international lawyer whom I hadn't met until 2024 in my previous life, I secretly established an offshore holding company in Delaware called Phoenix Capital Holdings. All new, highly profitable contracts were no longer signed through my main company, but through subsidiaries controlled by Phoenix Capital. I let the mother company look like it was growing, but the real profits and valuable assets were quietly being transferred out of the country month by month. In tandem, I hired a private detective agency run by a former intelligence officer. I paid him a substantial cash advance for one task total surveillance of the Sterling family. "I want everything," I told him during our secret meeting in an obscure cafe. "Hidden bank accounts, mistresses, cash transactions, and especially the connections of his daughter, Evelyn, with a certain Julian Vane from Bristol." The detective nodded professionally. "You'll have the first reports in 2 weeks, Mr. Pendleton. No one will know we are on them." Leaving the cafe, I felt a deep satisfaction. In my first life, I had been a lamb led to the slaughter. Now, I was the wolf measuring every stride. Saturday morning at the country club was wrapped in a light fog. Charles Sterling was waiting for me on the green, looking pristine in an all-white golf outfit. His face lit up with a wide, paternal smile, the same smile that had once made me believe I found the father I never had. "Arthur, my boy," he shouted, shaking my hand firmly. "Evelyn told me you're busy, but I'm glad you made time for your future father-in-law, if the rumors about a ring are true." "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. For you, I always make time," I replied reverently. We began the game. By the fourth hole, as we drove the electric cart, he brought up the topic he actually cared about. "You know, Arthur, real estate is a gold mine right now. I just secured permits for a massive residential complex in the north. But banks demand massive guarantees, and my liquidity is tied up in other lands. I was thinking, what if your logistics company and my construction firm collaborated? LA strategic merger, perhaps, to ensure massive capitalization." In my past life, this proposal came after the wedding. Launching it so early proved his financial situation was far more desperate than he let on. He needed my money immediately. "That sounds like an extraordinary idea, Mr. Sterling." I feigned excitement. "My company has excellent cash flow right now. If we can use that flow to guarantee your loans in exchange for a share of the complex's profits, It would be the perfect family business. The old man's eyes gleamed with barely suppressed greed. He thought he had swallowed me whole. He didn't realize he was shaking hands with his financial executioner. The beach in Mykonos was deserted at sunset. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold. I had organized everything perfectly, just like the first time: a secluded table, candles, and a violinist. Evelyn wore a long blue dress. When I dropped to one knee and opened the black velvet box, a genuine look of surprise, followed quickly by triumph, washed over her face. "Evelyn, will you marry me?" I asked, looking into her eyes. I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw an actress in a play whose ending only I knew. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, Arthur," she cried, throwing her arms around me. As she wept with joy, or rather, with the realization that her father's plan was working, I thought about the report I had received from my detective the day before. It contained clear photographs of Evelyn and Julian in a discreet hotel, taken just 3 days before our trip. While I was buying her a diamond ring, she was planning her future with another man using my resources. "We'll have the most beautiful wedding, Arthur," she whispered. "My father is so happy. You're part of the family now." "I'm happy to hear that, Evelyn," I smiled in the dark. The wedding was set for that autumn. A lavish affair, 80% paid for by me, under the pretext that her father's funds were temporarily locked in the new project. I accepted it all without a word, playing the role of the submissive, perfect groom. The wedding day was a display of pure opulence at a renowned estate. In my tuxedo, I looked like the luckiest man alive. Charles Sterling walked among the guests, ministers, judges, and high-profile businessmen, proudly introducing me as his new partner and the genius behind the family holding. At the main table sat Evelyn's brother, Julian Sterling, an arrogant 25-year-old addicted to high-stakes gambling. He looked down on me as an outsider. He didn't know that, through my detectives, I already had a complete list of his debts to underground poker clubs, debts exceeding $500,000 that his father paid off, using money meant for construction suppliers. During our first dance, I held Evelyn close. I knew her lover. Julian Vane was actually among the guests, listed as a family friend. I caught them exchanging complicit glances. The day after the wedding, we signed the first official papers. At my father-in-law's suggestion, we appointed an external auditing firm to evaluate my logistics company. The audit firm was secretly controlled by Charles's associates, meant to find legal ways to drain my capital into sterling real estate. However, my CFO, Michael, whom Charles had paid to spy on me, was actually giving them modified reports under my direct orders. I let them believe my company was generating 3 times its actual profit through fake contracts with my offshore accounts. I created the illusion of a massive treasure, causing them to borrow even more heavily from banks to buy shares in our joint holding, thinking they were robbing me blind. The winter of 2022 brought the exact economic crisis I had anticipated. The real estate market froze, interest rates soared, and housing sales plummeted by 60%. Charles's construction sites ground to a halt. Suppliers began sending default notices, and banks threatened to foreclose on his primary lands. One November evening, I was called urgently to my father-in-law's office. Charles was pale and sweating, Evelyn was crying on the sofa, and Julian was biting his nails. "Arthur, my boy, the situation is critical," Charles said, his arrogance completely gone. "We need a quick capital injection, $2 million, or the bank takes our main land in the north and we go under. My life's work will be ruined." Evelyn walked over and grabbed my hands. "Arthur, please save us. Your company's accounts are full. Father will cede another 10% of the holding as a guarantee. We're family, aren't we?" I feigned deep concern, pretending to wage an intense internal battle. In my first life, I had given this money with my eyes closed, signing my own death warrant. $2 million is a massive sum. It means freezing all my plans to modernize my truck fleet, I said, putting a hand to my forehead. "Arthur, please," Julian pleaded, using a humble tone he had never used with me before. "If we fall, we all fall." After a tense silence, I looked up and nodded. Fine. I'll do it. Because I love you, Evelyn, and I trust your father. I'll transfer the $2 million tomorrow. Charles let out a massive sigh of relief. Evelyn hugged me tightly. What they didn't know was that those $2 million didn't come from my company's real profits. They were secretly borrowed by my firm from an investment fund I controlled through Phoenix Capital, with a special clause in case of default or devaluation of the joint holding shares. The fund had the right to foreclose not just on my company, but on Charles and Evelyn Sterling personally. I was binding them to a time bomb, and they were thanking me for it. By 2024, I had consolidated all the evidence needed for their total destruction. My private detectives had done exceptional work, compiling thick files, high-fidelity audio recordings, and videos that would shatter any defense in court. The most valuable pieces included tax fraud audio recordings of Charles Sterling, negotiating a $50,000 bribe with tax inspectors to overlook a $3 million tax evasion scheme involving fake shell companies. Julian's debts video evidence of Julian Sterling signing blank promissory notes to underworld leaders, using construction equipment belonging to our joint holding as collateral. Evelyn's betrayal. Explicit text messages and videos of Evelyn and her lover, Julian Vane. In one recording from a restaurant in 2024, Evelyn told him, "Just a little more patience, darling. Arthur signed most of the papers. Father says within 2 years we will restructure the shares and push him out. Then we'll have all his millions and we can be together openly." Hearing her confirm the plan to destroy me in her own voice brought a brief sting to my heart, but it quickly faded into a cold smile. They thought they had 2 years. They didn't know their time was already up. In parallel, I manipulated the joint holdings supply contracts. Through intermediary companies I controlled via proxies, I artificially inflated the prices of cement, steel, and finishes used on Charles's construction sites. The holding paid astronomical sums, and the profits leaked directly into Phoenix Capital's accounts in Delaware. While Charles bragged about his buildings rising, he didn't realize each floor brought him closer to insolvency as production costs far exceeded market value. By early 2026, the Sterling Towers residential complex was 90% complete. It was the crown jewel of their family. Charles organized press conferences, appeared on economic news shows, and bragged about the most successful real estate project of the decade. Evelyn became a constant fixture in lifestyle magazines, presenting herself as a successful businesswoman and fulfilled wife. In the eyes of the public and her family, I was just a shadow in the background, the hard-working husband handling boring logistics who approved every fund transfer without question. I had become so predictable in my generosity that my father-in-law didn't even call to ask anymore. He just sent documents to be signed through Evelyn. "Arthur, darling, Father needs your signature on this final merger deed," Evelyn told me one evening in our living room. "It's just a formality to completely unify the holdings' assets before going public this autumn." I took the document. It was the exact deed I had signed on the night of my death, in my previous life, a complex document written in ambiguous legal terms, where I waived my veto rights on the board, and transferred total operational control to Charles Sterling in exchange for non-voting preferred shares. Shares that, in the event of bankruptcy, became completely worthless. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, pulling out my pen. "If your father thinks this is the best way to increase the company's value, I have total faith in him." I signed the document with a firm stroke. Evelyn looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw that same cruel spark of satisfaction I had seen in my final seconds of life in the past. She thought I had just signed my financial death warrant. She didn't know that, just an hour earlier, my lawyers at Phoenix Capital had activated the foreclosure clause for the 2022 loan, adding accumulated penalties that brought the total debt to $7.4 million, a sum the Sterling holding did not have. Monday evening, June 15, 2026. The exact date, the exact place, the mansion. Outside, a light rain tapped rhythmically against the massive living room windows, creating a somber atmosphere. I was dressed in the exact same clothes as in my first life. I sat on the leather sofa, watching the fire burn in the fireplace. Evelyn walked into the room wearing her black silk dress. In her hand, she held a bottle of vintage red wine and 2 crystal glasses. She smiled, but her smile was fixed, like a wax mask. "Let's celebrate, Arthur," she said, pouring the wine. "We've finalized all the paperwork. As of tomorrow, we are officially among the wealthiest people in the country." She handed me a glass. My heart hammered. I knew from my detective's reports that she had bought a rare digitalist toxin from an underworld contact supplied by her brother, a poison that caused cardiac arrest without leaving clear traces in routine autopsies. "To our future, Evelyn," I said, raising my glass. "To our future," she repeated, taking a small sip from her own glass. The moment she turned her back to grab an ice bucket from the bar behind her, I executed the sleight of hand I had practiced for months. With a swift, precise motion, I swapped my glass with hers. When she turned back, I brought the glass to my mouth, pretending to take a large gulp, then set it down. Exactly 3 minutes passed. I began to fake agony. I clutched my throat, let my body shake convulsively, and collapsed from the sofa onto the cold marble floor, landing in the exact position I had died in 5 years ago. The office door opened immediately, and Charles Sterling stepped into the living room, followed by his son, Julian. Both had relaxed faces, lit by a smirk of absolute triumph. Evelyn leaned over me, watching my body mimic its final twitches. "It's over, Arthur. You're just a useful idiot," she said, uttering the exact words that had marked my end in my first life. "Did you really think a woman like me could ever love a nobody like you? It was all a game, from our very first date to tonight." "You were good with numbers, boy," Charles added, patting his son on the shoulder. "But now the holding is entirely ours." At that moment, the silence of the room was shattered. I slowly stood up, perfectly calm, brushing invisible dust off my trousers. I adjusted my jacket and looked directly at them. Evelyn's smile froze instantly. Charles stumbled back, dropping his cigar, while Julian let out a gasp of pure terror, as if he were looking at a ghost. What is happening? Why are you standing?" Evelyn screamed, looking frantically from me to the empty glass on the table. "Why am I not dying, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice as cold as ice. "Because the poisoned wine is in the glass in your hand, the one you took a small sip from earlier, before I swapped them. But don't worry, the dose you took from your own glass was too small to kill you. It will only give you a terrible migraine over the next few hours. I am not a killer like you. I am simply the one delivering your sentence." Before any of them could react or run, the front door was thrown wide open. 8 masked police officers rushed into the living room, accompanied by 2 federal prosecutors and a judicial executor carrying a thick file. "Charles Sterling, Evelyn Pendleton, you are under arrest for attempted murder, grand tax evasion, money laundering, and bribery," the lead prosecutor declared, as officers immobilized Julian and his father, cuffing them. "This is madness! A setup!" Charles screamed, trying to wrench himself free. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? You're insane! You're destroying your own family!" "My family?" I asked, smiling grimly as the judicial executor approached the table. "Sir, please read them the current status of their assets." The man opened his file and began reading in a monotone, devastating voice. "Per the request of the majority creditor, Phoenix Capital Holdings, all bank accounts of Sterling Real Estate and the joint holding have been frozen tonight as of 8 p.m. for failure to pay an outstanding debt of $7.4 million. The Sterling Towers complex has been placed under asset seizure. Furthermore, this mansion has been legally transferred to Phoenix Capital to cover the accumulated debts of the parent company. The members of the Sterling family have 10 minutes to pack their strictly personal belongings before the property is sealed." Evelyn collapsed onto her knees, sobbing hysterically, looking up at me with eyes full of terror, despair, and utter disbelief. All her arrogance, all her icy beauty had melted away, leaving only a ruined woman caught in her own web. "Arthur, please, I beg you," she cried, trying to grab my legs. "I was wrong. I was influenced by my father. But I love you. Do the years we spent together mean nothing to you?" I stepped back, avoiding her touch. You never loved anyone but my money, Evelyn. While I worked 14 hours a day to give you this life, you were planning your future with Julian Vane, using my resources. You thought you were clever, that you could manipulate me like a puppet, but you were just a pawn in a game you never understood. Julian Sterling screamed as he was dragged toward the exit by officers. You'll pay for this, you bastard! I have friends who will destroy you! Your friends from the underworld? I asked, looking down at him. The ones you left blank promissory notes with? They were arrested an hour ago in a separate police operation based on anonymous evidence provided by me. All your debts are now held by a collection agency belonging to Phoenix Capital. You are completely finished, Julian. The courthouse was packed with journalists the next morning. The news of the spectacular collapse of the Sterling clan and their attempt to murder their billionaire son-in-law led every headline. Footage of Charles Sterling in handcuffs and Evelyn, hiding her face under a hood, played on a loop on every screen. I testified for 3 hours, presenting prosecutors with the complete audio and video recordings, the original altered deed documents, and the real financial ledgers. Their defense was utterly shattered. Their lawyers, some of the most expensive in the country, threw up their hands, advising them to plead guilty to secure a reduced sentence. After the hearings concluded, as I walked down the long corridor of the Palace of Justice, I saw Evelyn. She was being escorted by 2 officers back to the transport van. She looked deplorable, unwashed hair, eyes swollen from crying, and her black silk dress now wrinkled and stained. When she saw me, she stopped for a second. The officers allowed her to speak, keeping their distance. How did you know, Arthur? She asked, her voice hollow and dead. How could you predict our every move over the last 5 years? No one is that smart. No one can anticipate everything with such precision. Tell me, please, or I'll lose my mind in that cell. I stepped close to her, until my breath brushed her ear, matching the exact way she had leaned over me on the night she thought she killed me. I whispered with absolute profound satisfaction. Because I was reborn, Evelyn, I already lived the death you prepared for me, and the universe gave me the chance to come back and rewrite the ending. In this life, I was the one who smiled last. She stared at me, her eyes widening in mystical horror, finally realizing she hadn't fought a mere man, but a destiny that had come to collect its due. She was pulled forward by the officers, letting out a sharp cry of despair that echoed long down the cold stone corridors of the courthouse. A week later, I stood on the terrace of the mansion. The house was now empty of everything that reminded me of their presence. The furniture Evelyn had chosen had been auctioned off, and the money donated to orphanages, places that reminded me of my own harsh childhood. The sun was rising on the horizon, casting its first warm rays over the city. The air was clean, fresh, cleared of the storm that had lasted 5 long years. My phone rang on the table. It was my lead attorney from Phoenix Capital. Good morning, Mr. Pendleton. The sentences have been handed down. Charles Sterling received 12 years in federal prison. Evelyn received restorative justice, and 8 years for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud, and Julian got 10 years. All their assets have been permanently confiscated in favor of your company. The public listing for the new Phoenix holding has been approved for next month. We are on top of the world. Thank you, Andrew. You've done an excellent job. I'll see you at the office at 10, I replied, ending the call. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. I felt no anger. I felt no hate. All that burning desire for revenge that had guided my every step for the last 5 years had now transformed into a deep, cosmic peace. Justice had been served. The past had been repaired, and the future belonged entirely to me. I walked back inside, closing the terrace door behind me. In this life, my story didn't end on a cold marble floor. It was only just beginning.